Sherpa track. The Sherpa track is led by the personal emissaries of G20 leaders, and oversees negotiations, discusses the points that form the summit's agenda and coordinates most of the work. The Sherpa appointed by the Brazilian government is Ambassador Mauricio Lirio, Secretary of Economic and Financial Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Itamaraty. The Sherpas are an ethnic group from the mountainous region of Nepal, which in Tibetan means, people from the east. It is they who guide the climbers who aim to reach the top of Mount Everest. Without their skills, it would be almost impossible to reach the summit. In the G20, the Sherpas are the leaders of each country who take the discussions and agreements to the final summit with heads of state and government. The Sherpa track is made up of 15 working groups, 2 task forces and an initiative. Sherpa track. Anti-corruption group. The Anti-Corruption Working Group will formulate anti-corruption principles and standards to strengthen the implementation of the main international instruments, particularly the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. The advancement of justice, the reduction of inequalities and the promotion of sustainable development at all levels are transversal values of the priority issues of this front. One of the goals of the WG is to include in the agenda topics that are relevant for the anti-corruption efforts of the international community, and in which the leadership of G20 can provide significant contributions. The WG will also seek to establish the basis for its activities in the coming years by elaborating its 2025 to 2027 action plan. The advancement of justice, the reduction of inequalities and the promotion of sustainable development at all levels are transversal values of the thematic priorities of the working group, which will have the following priority goals. 1. Contribute to a fair world and a sustainable planet through the promotion of integrity and anti-corruption mechanisms. 2. Encourage the private sector to adopt comprehensive and converging measures of integrity and to combat corruption. 3. Improve the institutional organization of public administration in order to strengthen public integrity. 4. Use all available tools to recover assets, exploring direct measures in foreign jurisdictions and ensuring national coordination for an efficient recovery of assets. Highlight to the first item, which represents a unique opportunity to approach the relations between environmental and social sustainable development, the promotion of integrity, anti-corruption policies and programs, serving as a focal area to the declaration that will be adopted during the ministerial meeting on the subject, which will be held in 2024. The Brazilian Office of the Controller General, CGU, representing the Brazilian government, will be responsible for leading the actions of the working group during the next year, with the support of various other agencies. France will hold the co-presidency of the group. The Brazilian presidency will draw from the solid work foundation of WGAC, developed throughout the last 13 years, including the numerous documents, studies, reports and high-level principles produced by the group. In addition to developing principles to guide the actions of the G20 countries and the international community in their efforts to prevent and combat corruption, the WGAC also promotes the interchange of experiences and good practices. In 2024, the WGAC will maintain its traditional structure, holding 3 meetings at the technical level and 1 at the ministerial level. In addition to the ministerial declaration, the expected outcomes of the work of the WGAC include a high-level principles document, a report on the activities developed by the member states regarding previously made commitments, and a conceptual note as parallel events. Culture track. The Culture Working Group aims to foster discussions and actions aimed at harnessing the transformative potential of culture in society, its impact on the economy and sustainable and inclusive development, as well as the promotion of a culture of peace and harmony among peoples. By placing culture at the center of our efforts, we can create a legacy of peace, prosperity and cultural enrichment for future generations. Culture, in all its forms, is a powerful force that crosses borders, unites nations, and shapes the course of humanity. In the most diverse socio-cultural contexts, tolerance and respect for cultural differences are essential values for the construction of understandings and the resolution of conflicts. As societies invest in cultural preservation, education, and the creative economy, they unlock immense potential for sustainable development, social empowerment, and poverty reduction. With the recognition of culture as a global public asset, on the occasion of the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, in 2022, the international community began to rely on an important argument to position culture as a structuring element for sustainable development in the discussions of the post-2030 agenda. In this sense, the G20 Working Group intends to continue the trajectory of improvement and expansion of the advances made during the Indian presidency, discussing topics such as cultural diversity and inclusion, culture, digital environment and copyright, culture and sustainable economic development, preservation, safeguarding and promotion of cultural heritage. While the field of culture is still recovering from the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to huge losses in terms of jobs and income in the sector, countries are urged to turn to old and new challenges, conflicts in different parts of the world, attacks on cultural diversity, as well as the impacts of technological advances on social and economic relations. Since 2020 and, in an institutionalized way from 2021, the G20 countries have sought to insert and strengthen the field of culture within the framework of their international relations, aware of its transformative potential for ensuring sustainable development, socially inclusive and articulating respect and cooperation among peoples. The progress made since the presidency of Saudi Arabia in 2020, including the first G20 ministerial meeting on culture in Rome, Italy, in 2021, and the advances in the institutionalization of the work of the presidencies of Indonesia and India, point to a consensus around the need for culture to assume a central role in the country's development strategies. In Varanasi, India, during the 2023 meeting of Ministers of Culture, the WG terms of reference were approved, which point to the need to build structured dialogues between member countries, seeking to reduce north-south disparities and reaffirm the inclusive value of culture. The development track. The Development Working Group was created in 2010 with a double purpose: to establish an agenda for development and poverty reduction at G20 in coordination with other working groups, and to engage developing countries, non-members of the G20, especially those with lower development levels, in the works of G20. In 2016, after the creation of the Addis Ababa Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, the members of G20 adopted, in Hangzhou, the Agenda 2030 Action Plan for Sustainable Development, which designated the WG as the coordinating instance of actions for sustainable development in G20. One of the main goals of the G20 Development WG during the Brazilian presidency will be to promote the debate on social inclusion and reduction of inequalities, one of the central items of the Brazilian presidency of the G20, included in the Agenda 2030 through the Sustainable Development Goal 10 Sudanese pounds. Another priority item will be basic sanitation, which still poses a great challenge for developing countries. The Brazilian presidency of the G20 intends to generate a political impulse to provide more focus on the need for investments in this sector, equally present in the international discussions of the Agenda 2030, 6 Sudanese pounds, access to water and sanitation to all, one of the focuses of the high-level political forum of 2023. Finally, the WG will make efforts in trilateral cooperation, 17 Sudanese pounds, to bring decisions from public policies, Sherpa track, closer to the financial sources, finance track, with the objective of expanding partnership arrangements, forms of contribution and financing aimed at sustainable development actions. Brazil has unique traits and capabilities in this sense, and this initiative would tend to the requests and contributions of the G20 engagement groups. Digital Economy Track. The Digital Economy Working Group addresses themes related to connectivity, digital government, information integrity, and artificial intelligence. Established in 2021, the working group seeks to guide public policymakers on how to harness the digital potential of economies. To this end, the group encourages the process of digital transformation as an instrument for improving public participation and promoting socio-economic development in an inclusive manner. Approximately one-third of the global population, about 2.9 billion people, remains on the margins of the debate, without access to the tools and basic services that underpin the current transformation. Considering this scenario and based on the achievements of previous presidencies, Brazil, as shift chair of the G20, proposes 4 themes for the agenda of the Digital Economy Working Group for the year. Connectivity. A significant part of the world's population remains disconnected from the digital environment. The challenge of connecting people living in rural and remote areas remains relevant, as well as providing digital abilities to those with access to the internet. Digital government. Improve the relationship between governments and their citizens. Providing high-quality public services and seizing the opportunities of the digital economy require secure digital public infrastructure, reliable and inclusive. Addressing the topic with a focus on the components of digital identification and data sharing as enablers is essential to promote inclusion, enhance the digital economy and generate new opportunities for economic growth and development. Integrity of information. The ubiquity of global digital platforms has reshaped the mass communication landscape, transforming economic, social, cultural, and political interactions around the world. Artificial intelligence, AL, has been provoking intense debates, mainly focused on generative models and issues of ethical and responsible use. These debates, however, are not deep enough in relation to issues arising from the concentration of capacities, datasets, and infrastructure in a few actors, thus not reflecting the diversity of linguistic, cultural, racial, and geographical contexts. In 2017, the Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation and Communications represented Brazil and contributed to the elaboration of the script of priorities of the then Digital Economy Task Force, G20 DETF. The following year, the artificial intelligence theme was on the agenda, and the G20 ministers of the digital economy approved a set of principles for the development of this technology. With the establishment of the WG in 2021, the commitment has intensified, placing at the center of the discussions the harnessing of the digital potential of economies and the inequality of access to the benefits of digital transformation. In addition, the advancement in the provision of digital government services has become a priority for member countries. Education track. The Education Working Group originated from G20 members' concern about the large number of young people around the world who neither study nor work. The economic and financial crisis of 2008, the advance in the digitalization of economies, the challenge of meeting the targets of Sustainable Development Goal 4, quality education for all, and, more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic have accelerated the need to coordinate efforts and promote adjustments and advances in education policies on a global scale. During the Brazilian presidency, the Education Working Group will focus on 3 initiatives: evaluating education professionals through international qualification measures, sharing material on sustainable development between educational content platforms, and launching the G20 Award for Community Engagement in Schools. The world is facing a critical shortage of education professionals. The global deficit of teachers is estimated at 44 million. Demand and interest in the career are lower than necessary in most countries. On the other hand, the global peak of the number of children between the ages of 6 and 11 was reached in 2023. By 2029, the largest column of the global population pyramid will be between the ages of 12 and 16. These findings become even more concerning when the evidence confirms the irreplaceable role of teachers and schools in effectively achieving the global goal of universal quality education by 2030. The world needs to attract and retain more talented teachers. Although the regulation of educational professionals is almost always a task restricted to national governments, if not state and municipal networks, and therefore can vary greatly around the globe, it is still possible, through the G20, to make further progress in the scale, diversity and representativeness of people dedicated to education who are offered opportunities for additional qualification outside their country of origin as a motivational measure. On the other hand, practically all the G20 countries now have digital platforms for sharing educational material with their networks, an additional way of supporting teachers and making up-to-date content available for use in classrooms. In recent years, the use, volume and quality of digital material on these platforms has grown, but they still have little to do with each other. At the same time, there has also been a rising global concern with tackling the climate emergency through a deeper concern with incorporating the concepts of sustainable development into educational practices. When consulted on the subject, the vast majority of teachers around the world today agree on the importance of addressing sustainable development in the classroom from a wide variety of perspectives, but they still feel that their own preparation for conducting this debate is insufficient. For this reason, as this is relatively new material and of global interest, the G20 will seek to bring together the managers of national platforms so that a network can be formed which is capable of widening access to good practices, overcoming the barrier between the interest of teachers and students and the quality of the material available to them in order to advance this debate. Employment track. The Employment Working Group's priority will be to develop actions to create quality jobs and promote decent work in order to guarantee social inclusion and eliminate poverty, with a just transition in the face of digital and energy transformations. The group will discuss the global employment scenario, increasingly under the influence of technological change, which must be understood as a way of improving society's quality of life. The debate on gender equality and the promotion of diversity in the world of work will also be central. For 2024, a series of virtual and face-to-face meetings and seminars are already planned to discuss the priority axes of the WG and prepare the ministerial declaration that will be presented during the meeting of the Ministers of Labour. The discussions of the WG have been quite wide-ranging in recent years. In 2019, the defined priorities were related to new forms of work, solutions for a longer-lived society and gender equality. In 2020, during the Saudi presidency, the priority themes were youth employment, adapting pension and social protection systems to new types of work, and applying behavioral insights to the world of work and women's employment. In 2023, the Indian presidency selected topics related to job qualification, classification and harmonization of skills, sustainable social protection systems, and protection and decent work for platform workers. The Brazilian interventions in the co-chair reinforced that classification and harmonization initiatives should follow established international standards and not create dumping or job preparation. Tourism track. The Tourism Working Group's priority is to establish the promotion of sustainable development in the tourism sector, with actions involving qualification and capacity with a focus on international cooperation and the strengthening of multilateral institutions. Sustainable development has been a priority on the G20 agenda, and investment in international cooperation and the strengthening of multilateral institutions can mitigate asymmetries in the tourism sector and promote sustainable, inclusive and innovative practices in the sector. The working group intends to carry out integrated work with the G20 finance track, with the intention of seeking guidance on tourism financing and multilateral banks, with the objective of strengthening the sector as a vector of socio-economic development. The online platform of good practices and the panel of tourism and sustainable development goals, SDGs, of G20 are important tools for monitoring progress and boosting tourism's contribution to the SDGs. Brazil has actively participated in the discussions and contributed to the development of the sector in the G20 countries. Tourism plays a fundamental role in the global economy, contributing significantly to GDP and job creation. In 2022, the sector represented 7.6% of the world's GDP and employed almost 296 million people. The first meeting of G20 tourism ministers occurred in 2010, convened by the South African government when it was called T20. That same year, under the South Korean presidency, a second meeting was held to discuss the sector's contribution to economic growth and job creation. According to the G20 panel on tourism and the Sustainable Development Goals, the G20 countries represent 74% of international arrivals and 73% of tourism-related exports in 2022.
Trade and Investment Track. The Trade and Investment Working Group concentrates on issues related to strengthening trade and investment mechanisms of the G20 member states, promoting the growth of global trade, the coordination and cooperation among investment policies, supporting multilateral negotiations and including global value gain chains. Brazil believes that international trade and investments have a key role to fulfill in the achievement of the common goals of the G20 members in order to promote development and to guarantee economic progress and social inclusion. The priorities of the Brazilian presidency of the G20 focus on building a more just world through the promotion of sustainable development on its three pillars: social, environmental and economic. The strategic guidelines proposed by the Brazilian presidency are: 1. Trade and sustainability. As affirmed by the G20 leaders in the New Delhi Declaration, 2023, commercial and environmental policies must be mutually supportive, consistent with the rules of the World Trade Organization, WTO, and with multilateral environmental agreements, and does not represent unjustifiable obstacles to trade. Under these conditions, international trade can be an important instrument to foster growth, reduce poverty and protect the environment across the world. 2. Sustainable development and investment agreements. The retraction of global flows of direct foreign investment, DFI, following the COVID-19 pandemic affected, in particular, the developing countries, especially those of relatively lower development, highlighting once again the significant role of DFIs in trade, economic growth and the ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. 3. Women and international trade. In line with the goal of the Brazilian presidency of the G20 of building a more just world, the WG will debate the issue of women and international trade. Women face additional obstacles when participating in international trade, ranging from discrimination to limited access to resources and opportunities. There is a need to expand development opportunities to underrepresented groups and to accelerate progress towards inclusive trade. 4. Reforming the WTO and strengthening the multilateral trade system. The WG will continue to advance the discussions about the political support of the G20 for the reform of the WTO and the strengthening of the multilateral trade system. For Brazil, it is essential to reinforce the notion of development as an integral part of the WTO reform agenda and as a guiding principle for negotiations. The Trade and Investment Working Group, TIWG, was established in 2016. Brazil has participated actively, cooperatively and consistently since the group's first meeting. The Brazilian participation reflects the country's historical position in defending multilateralism, the increase of participation of developing countries in trade and investment, international flows, and the promotion of sustainable development on its three pillars: social, economic, and environmental. In this sense, in its interventions in the WG as well as in subsequent trade and investment ministerial meetings of the G20, Brazil has defended the improvement of the multilateral trade system, centered at the WTO, and the strengthening of cooperation among members of the G20 on issues related to development, taking into consideration that the challenges faced by international trade disproportionately affect the developing countries. Research and Innovation Track. The new Research and Innovation Working Group, which will be created under the Brazilian presidency of the G20, will work on innovation open to fair and sustainable development. As coordinator, Brazil intends to advance in terms of technology access and transfer to developing countries. The working group is an outcome of the Research and Innovation Initiative of the G20, G20 RIAG, a result of the academic forum promoted by the Italian presidency, in 2021. We live in a new international scenario, marked by the consequences of a pandemic and of geopolitical conflicts of great proportion, which evidence the fragility of the global production and supply chains, and have increased the disputes for the technological domain and the competition based on national interests. At the same time, the world faces global challenges, such as extreme climate events, hydric shortages, the elevation of ocean levels, emergencies in health, and food insecurity. These issues do not recognize borders and will only be resolved with international cooperation in science, technology, and innovation. In this light, the G20 has been highlighted as an important forum for science, technology, and innovation. The first meeting of the G20 Research and Innovation Initiative, G20 RIAG, was held in 2022, in Indonesia. The priority issues of the latest two editions of the WG centered on sustainability, specifically on research and innovation related to biodiversity, eco-innovations for energy transition, circular bioeconomy, blue sustainable economy, and materials for sustainable energies. Brazil proposes to continue what was started during the Indonesian and Indian presidencies in the form of the G20 Research and Innovation Initiative meeting, now under the format of a working group on these issues, an unprecedented initiative. In this sense, the goal is to continue the work of transforming research and innovation ecosystems to responsibly and efficiently respond to the social and environmental challenges we face, including natural risks, disasters, and extreme climate events, and to support joint efforts. The workgroup will also stimulate the mobility of students, academics, researchers, and scientists between research and higher education institutions through mobility programs to reduce the barriers to interinstitutional collaborations. The goal is to advance in terms of technology access and transfer to developing countries, reducing inequalities and promoting inclusive, fair, and sustainable development. Energy transitions. The Energy Transitions Working Group's priority is to debate the global transition scenario towards the use of clean and sustainable energy sources and the paths towards a fair, accessible, and inclusive energy transition. The themes discussed as priorities during India's presidency in 2023 were fuels for the future, low-cost financing for the energy transition, and the energy transition through the energy gap approach. Universal access to clean energy was also highlighted as way to adjust, accessible and inclusive energy transition, energy security and diversification of chains of supply/provide, energy efficiency and low-carbon industrial transitions, and responsible consumption. For 2024, the main themes will be the just and inclusive energy transition, how to accelerate the financing of the energy transitions, the social dimension of the energy transition, and the perspectives of sustainable fuel innovation. The second meeting of the working group occurred on April 2 and 3, 2023. The group meeting was held in the Indian city of Gandhinagar and discussed the development of policies and strategies to support the global transition to clean and sustainable energy sources. In September 2023, Brazil assumed the co-chairmanship of the Management Committee of the Clean Energy Ministerial de Energia Limpa, in free translation, one of the leading international forums for collaboration for the promotion of the world's clean energy. Also in September, the Global Alliance for Biofuels was launched, which was attended by President Lula in a ceremony held on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The initiative, which has the participation of the world's three main biofuel producers, Brazil, United States, and India, brings together 19 countries and 12 international organizations with the goal of expanding technical and technological cooperation aimed at the expansion of biofuels, the decarbonization of the transport sector, and the energy transition.